Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 286. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about ancient cities and temples and food culture as we go to southern South Korea.
Got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have three news stories for you. All three of them are on airlines, and airlines taking different approaches to profanity and to just where to draw the line. First, let's start with Spirit Airline, who has sparked a new controversy because they've used mobile female strippers to promote their new service to Las Vegas. They have stripper mobiles featuring bikini-clad pole-dancing women on the back of a moving truck who are being driven around Los Angeles with the words, "I'll go both ways for $18." Some people find that offensive. Speaking of offensive, Virgin Airlines had a little bit of a screw-up because someone decided to wake up portions of the airplane crew, thinking they were going to send a message just to their private TV screen, and accidentally woke up the entire plane with, "Get up, you blankety blanks." Some people found that offensive. Versus Delta, which has taken an entire different approach. A Delta passenger was complaining about a delay and happened to drop the F-bomb and was promptly kicked off a flight. So I hope those three stories clarify for you how you should behave on planes. Links to all three of those stories can be found in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Rease, who is coming to us from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, but has come to talk to us about southern South Korea. Rease, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
And southern South Korea, or South Korea, just to sound fairly silly, you lived there for how long?
Myself and my girlfriend Nicki lived there for 1 year, teaching English in the South Korean public schools.
And what led you to South Korea?
Well, we were looking at the teaching options around the world, really, and Korea and Japan looked like the best two financially and as an interest from a travel perspective.
No, financially meaning it pays a little better to be an English teacher in Japan or in South Korea?
Yes, exactly. We were looking at South America and Europe as options as well, but the pay was a lot better in South Korea, to be honest. So we were able to save money for other travel ideas that we had as well. So,
and my take is, now that you have spent a year in South Korea, your favorite part is the southern part.
Yes.
Did you know that ahead of time? Did you pick that part, or did you just luck out?
Pretty much lucked out.
Okay.
We were looking for an area with potentially a beach or some kind of coastline area that we could spend time at. So on speaking to the staff working for the public schools, they suggested Ulsan, which is not a very popular city for tourists, but it was a great place to live. So we were happy we chose that.
So if someone were to go to South Korea, what kind of itinerary would you recommend for them to see that region?
Well, certainly most people would be flying into Seoul. So from there, the easiest route down would be to Busan, which is the second largest city in Korea, and also a very interesting place to visit. There is another important city called Gyeongju, which is the ancient capital.
Now, I want to say Busan is also known to Americans as Pusan, like the Pusan perimeter from the Korean conflict.
Yeah, exactly right. They actually, in Korean, a B and a P, they have the same letter in the Korean language. So that's exactly right, that it's called both of those things.
Okay, so in the early days of the Korean War, this is the only part of South Korea that hadn't fallen to the North Korean invasion.
Yeah, it is the only Korean city that didn't fall. That is correct.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, Busan is a really nice city too. As far as Korean cities go, I wouldn't have said that they're a great place to travel to, because Seoul is a good place to travel, but all of the other Korean cities are just a poor man's Seoul, if you will. They're all quite similar, and once you've seen one, there's not a lot of new things that you're going to see inside the cities themselves, I would say.
Are the cities mostly very new historically? Do they go back that far, or?
Yeah, most of them have been built up since the Korean War ended in the 50s. So, I mean, most of them are pretty much just a concrete jungle. I mean, there are some interesting temples, and certainly Busan has a fish market, which is really interesting to go to. So it's worth stopping. But you're not going to spend 5 days in a Korean city and find enough things to keep you interested, really. Most of the interesting things to see and do are outside of the bigger metropolitan areas.
Okay, so where would you recommend then after we leave Busan? We see the fish market and then we go where?
Gyeongju is the ancient capital. That's about 2 hours bus ride from Busan. And inside Gyeongju there are ancient burial tombs. They're extremely interesting to see. The city is built around them. So we actually rented bicycles for the day and just biked around the city, going to the different ancient tombs, and there are large temples as well that are very interesting to go to. It's called Bulguksa.
And you say an ancient city. I'm reading that this is a city that is nearly 2,000 years old. Oh, actually over 2,000 years old. Sorry, I'm reading incorrectly.
Yeah, it is an ancient city, definitely. And all of the burial tombs are for the ancient kings of the old Korean dynasties. And actually one of them is, they've opened it up to the public, and it's got like a cross-section of one of the tombs. So that's definitely worth going in to see.
And you say one of the tombs. Do you happen to recall which tomb that is?
No, it's just, there's like a large area of where the tombs all are situated. And by walking around there, you would come across like the touristy tomb, as it were.
And when we're talking about tombs of ancient kings, are these still kings that the Korean people know the names for 2,000 years later?
Yeah, some of them are definitely famous among Koreans, they would know who they are. I must say I don't know any of them, but...
I can't recall ever getting in my history studies, and I've studied history a little bit, the names of any Korean kings, so I know that I wouldn't know them, but I was just curious, when you're talking about a history that long and that rich, how long the memory is.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the Korean history syllable would include at least some of the more famous kings in that area. But yeah, it's a great place to visit, definitely Gyeongju.
Okay. Anything else we should see while we're there in Gyeongju?
Well, Korea's largest temple is also in Gyeongju. Mm-hmm. That's called Bulguksa. Also a great place to visit.
And we say temple, it is a Buddhist temple?
Yes, okay. It's a Buddhist temple, yeah. The religion in Korea historically has been dominated by Buddhism, but today Christianity and Buddhism are on an equal level, really, in terms of numbers of followers. But all of the temples and places of interest, religious-wise, all of the temples are Buddhist that you were visiting.
Oh, that's what I recalled. That's why I was guessing that, but I wasn't positive. Okay.
Also, very close to the tombs area of Gyeongju, there's Anapji Pond, which is a beautiful temple set around, well, a pond, as you can imagine. And yeah, that's also nice to see. And that's actually opposite the Gyeongju National Museum, which I didn't visit myself, but I've heard that the artifacts inside and the information on the history is also quite interesting. So.
Okay. And where to next?
Pretty much in the central area of the south coast, there's a small town called Yeosu, Yeosu. That's a little bit more off the beaten path. Busan and Gyeongju are definitely tourist hotspots for South Korea, but Yeosu is probably less so. So it's a bit more of a real feel about a South Korean fishing community on the south coast.
And how is it different because of that? What would I notice that's different because there are fewer tourists, fewer people who look like me?
Well, certainly there are less places to stay.
Okay.
It's a little bit more difficult to get to. For instance, if you're taking a train there, you'd have to change trains at one point if you're coming from Busan or Gyeongju.
Okay.
And inside the city itself, there's not the bright lights that you would see in Busan or Seoul.
Okay. A little more traditional.
Yeah, certainly more traditional, and the streets are not as busy. It's a quieter area, certainly.
Okay. Are there other highlights we should hit while we're down here?
From Yeosu, there's an island called Dolsan-do. It's a very nice island. Right at the very tip of it, the southern tip of the island is the most interesting. There's a small beach area that is nice to go to, and just past the beach, there's a temple set high on the cliff that gives you a great lookout point for the whole of the south coast and into the sea. So that's a very nice temple to visit as well on Dolsan-do.
Okay. When you first arrived in this area, what surprised you?
Probably the largest feature in Yeosu is they have two large bridges in the bay area of the city. And I wasn't expecting it at all because, as I said, it's a much smaller area compared to Busan. But they've built this beautiful bridge to Dolsan-do, and yeah, that was probably the biggest shock, is the beauty of the bay down there. I thought it was quite impressive.
Okay. How about the culture? You were settling in to stay for a year, so you were obviously not just interacting with tourists. What surprised you about the culture?
I think the effects of Confucianism were the biggest shock to me.
How so?
Well, I had read about Confucianism before going, and we actually had an orientation that, gave us some tips and advice on how to deal with it. But the respect that Koreans give to their elders is just above and beyond what you would expect, really. It almost leads you to think that common sense is out of the window, and whatever the older guy says, you better do it, pretty much.
A little different from where you grew up, I'm gathering.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, obviously, a respect to elders is general everywhere, but it just takes it to a different level in Korea.
Okay.
And they're certainly extremely proud nation. They're they're very proud of their history and their culture, but I think it's similar to Japan in that they're very forward thinking as well.
Mm-hmm.
And their work ethic is one of their strongest points, I would say, as Korean people.
So you were interacting with people in the classroom all the time.
Yeah.
How did you find ways to interact with them outside the classroom? Are there ways that even a tourist could break in a little into the local culture?
Certainly, I think one of the best places to do that would be restaurants, because the Korean eating culture, they would sit the food in the middle of the table and it's a very social event. It's not that you order one dish to yourself, you order 10 dishes for the entire table and it's a very social event. So certainly restaurants would be a good place to interact with Korean people. They love their food as well, so they'll certainly try and help you out with how to eat or what to eat. Yeah, they love that.
Now, does that mean that as I come in as a solo traveler or a couple or whatever, that I'm going to be seating family style in a typical restaurant? Or just if I have Korean friends, that's a good place to interact?
If you were on your own, then I guess that you would be eating by yourself, but the Korean people are so friendly, especially in that environment, that I think that if it looked like you were struggling or anything like that, they would come and help you. There's a good chance that you would get invited to go and sit with somebody and eat.
Interesting.
If you were in a truly Korean restaurant, they're pretty proud of their food and stuff, so they'd like to have you over.
Can you think of one place where the hospitality was more than you were expecting?
Actually, I think the best hospitality we enjoyed was on Gyeongju, which is a much smaller fishing island off the west coast of Korea. It's a small fishing island. There were 0 other tourists when we went there, but it was very easy to get to from Busan. And yeah, the people were very friendly. There was one restaurant open while we were there and one hotel, and that was it. Everything else was pretty much closed for the winter. But the restaurant owner spoke English, which is very strange in those more remote areas. And he was extremely helpful. He ordered us easily the best seafood soup I've ever eaten. And yeah, that was a good experience. He sat down with us, talked to us for a bit. It was nice.
What was the best day you had there in that year?
I think our best day was probably on the southern coast of Jeju, which is known as South Korea's Hawaii. We woke up early and went to Sunrise Peak on the east end of the island, which is a really nice tourist spot. Not many foreign tourists in Jeju, mainly Korean tourists, but yeah, Sunrise Peak was very impressive. And we had actually rented a car, so we drove along the south coast and stopped off at one of Jeju's most popular beaches, Jungmun, which is near their southern city of Sogwipu. It was a very impressive beach, beautiful hotels all around, much too expensive for me to afford.
Impressive large beach or?
It was just, there was golden sand. It was a fairly large beach as well. And I loved swimming in the sea, and the waves were superb that day. So that probably tipped it over the edge for me in brilliance, is the waves. But yeah, it was definitely a great place to spend the day. And then for the evening, we went a bit further down the coast to a temple which looked out over the southern coast at the foot of a mountain called Sanbang. It looked out over the coast, and then just a 10-minute walk down from the temple was an amazing rock formation that had obviously been eroded by the sea, and had created a pretty impressive coastline down there too. So yeah, that was definitely a good day, a busy day, 3 of Jeju's tourist sites in a day, but it was definitely doable, so it wasn't a tiring ordeal.
And you're describing a warm, I'm going to guess, summer day. Weather. My brother was stationed in Korea when he was, well, I guess when he was a old teenager in the U.S. Army, and he described some of the winters there. Now, one of the names for Korea is Chosun, the Chosun Peninsula, and he described it, I think the nickname was Frozen Chosun.
Yeah, definitely the winters are pretty brutal in Korea. Unless you're a big fan of the cold, you don't want to be visiting in November, December, and January.
Okay.
Because it is extremely cold, particularly in the northern part, like Seoul and that area.
Right, and that's clearly where he was, right?
Yeah, which is, the winters are extremely cold.
And when we say extremely cold, they were waking up in the middle of the night to start up their diesel vehicle so that the diesel wouldn't gel. Basically, they had to keep it running so that...
Whoa.
Yes, exactly. So, pretty cold.
Yeah, I can imagine it being that cold. That makes me thankful that we were living in the south, to be honest. Yeah, we actually took a trip to the north in January for an ice fishing festival.
Okay.
Korea's festivals, they absolutely love their festivals. They pour money into them, and they're always an extremely entertaining day out. They have so many different festivals. We went to 5 or 6 festivals.
Did you have a favorite?
I think the ice fishing festival was my favorite.
Interesting. Okay.
It was in January, so in the heart of the brutal winter, way up on the northeast end of the peninsula. And basically, the river had frozen over in this famous area for mountain trout in Korea. So to make things interesting, you can start off by just fishing in a hole into the river, a normal ice fishing. But then we managed to get in on one of the more entertaining parts of the day, where you jump into a freezing cold pool of water. I don't know how it wasn't ice, it was so cold, and try to catch the mountain trout by hand, which was pretty difficult. I gave up long before I was going to catch a trout, but some of our friends did actually manage to pick up some fish and get them in their t-shirts, so that was definitely entertaining.
All right. One warning you would have about going to South Korea?
The language barrier is extremely difficult, I must say.
I was wondering from what you said. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is very difficult if you have no Korean, which is very likely, obviously, if you're just going to travel. I mean, in the larger areas, Seoul, Busan, any city that you go to, certainly any tourist area, you're going to find people who speak English. But as far as signs and things like that, it's not very common that they're going to be translated into English. And sometimes they're not even written with English letters. They're just in Hangul, Korean's language. So it does make things difficult to travel around. I would say one of the easiest things to do would be to try and translate places that you need to go, or important words like bus or train, and just write down the Korean characters so that you could match them up to signs and try and get to the right place if it was getting difficult. But certainly the language barrier is quite hard to overcome in some areas.
One local that you met that you wish everybody could meet?
It would have to be the owner of a guest house in Seoul. His name was Min. He owns a guest house called the Grape Garden. It is probably the best place I've stayed in all my travels, I think. He was an awesome guy. And it feels like you're literally staying in his house. And he's so friendly. He'll give you all the information. You know, he doesn't run any tours himself, so he's not going to try and rip you off or anything. He's just a really nice guy. He took us out drinking for a night. We went to a karaoke bar and music bars and things. And yeah, he's a really cool guy. Min. I wish everyone could meet him.
If I say the most beautiful place in South Korea, what do you picture?
I think Jeju Island is the most beautiful place that we visited. The island on a whole, it just has everything that you would want from a travel place. It has beautiful beaches on both ends of the island. It has a huge volcano in the middle, Halasan, which is a challenging hike. Lush greenery all around the inside of the island. Great culture, great history. It's a very interesting place to travel. I would say that's the most beautiful place that we visited in Korea.
When did you know that your year in Korea had changed you?
Probably one standout event was going drinking with my teachers. Korean drinking culture is nothing what I expected. It's far heavier than I could have pictured before going. The national drink is soju, so they love to drink soju. I think spending the evening with my teachers, eating raw fish and drinking soju, and going home drunk at 8:30 p.m., that was a very Korean experience for me. And yeah, that's when I thought, yeah, maybe I have changed and become a little bit Korean.
Okay. And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in South Korea?
So many things. I think that they're called ajumas. They're older ladies in South Korea. I think that their dress sense and their general demeanor is brilliant, and you would only find it in South Korea. They walk around with visors, even if it's raining, and there's no way you're going to mess with an ajuma. You can have a 3-foot, 80-year-old woman, and she will shoulder barge you out of the way to get on a bus. And you just have to take the hit and say, only in South Korea.
Anything else that you think people should know before they visit South Korea?
In terms of getting around, the trains and buses are really, really easy to use. They're really comfortable, and they're pretty reasonable priced in comparison to Western countries. So for traveling around, you definitely have no worries with the trains and buses. That's for sure. The area I mentioned earlier, Hyuk-san-do, on the west coast, was one of our better experiences because you managed to get out into a small community. There was one hotel on the island, there was 2 or 3 restaurants, a small fishing community, and you just really felt like you were in it with the locals. And that was a great place to visit, definitely, to get a good feel of the south end of Korea, which has a huge stake in the fishing business.
Okay. Last 3 questions.
Yeah.
Best money-saving tip?
My best money-saving tip is love motels.
Okay.
They're also something that no guidebook really mentions because they're such a faux pas. But in some of the smaller areas especially, you're not going to find things like homestays or cheaper hotels. So love motels, well, let's not go into the details of why they exist, but
Can you rent them by the hour?
I can safely say I've never asked.
Okay.
But if I was guessing, then I would say probably.
Okay.
But they are, on the whole, a clean and cheap option to stay, and they're about $15 for a double. And as long as you're careful about it and you scope out the area first, they're not going to be a danger or anything like that. They're usually a good option. And I would say 80% of the places we stayed traveling around South Korea were love motels because there's a lot of them and they're a cheap option. So,
And I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I'm getting a picture of something slightly on the tacky side from the name. Am I completely off base here? Or?
no, they're certainly on the tacky side,
Okay.
yes.
But clean. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to want to spend a lot of time in them, but they're not much different from any cheap hotel that you would stay in other places, really. So, yeah, they're just a good option, and I know that guidebooks wouldn't mention them due to the name. Mainly. So,
Okay. Last 2 questions.
yeah.
Finish this sentence for me. You really know you're in South Korea when what?
When kimchi is served for breakfast. That's when you know you're in South Korea.
Now you're going to need to describe kimchi for some people who don't know what it is.
Kimchi is Korea's staple dish. It's a red, spicy cabbage.
It's
basically.
fermented, as I recall.
Yeah, it is fermented, yeah. So they ferment the cabbage and then they basically spread it in a red spice. And I must say, when I went there, I despised kimchi. It was with every meal and I couldn't get away from it and it was horrible. But after about a few weeks, I turned and now I love kimchi and I miss it a little bit.
Excellent. And if you had to describe southern South Korea in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Certainly culture, because they're so proud of their culture, their history. Technology, because they're very forward-thinking. I've actually read in a few places that it's the most technologically advanced country in the world. So,
It's, I think, the highest internet penetration, as I recall.
yeah, I've read that, definitely. Yeah, it's certainly on a par with Japan in terms of technological advancement. And the last one I would say, well, I'll put 2 in, the crazy north.
Okay. This is the southern view of North Korea.
Well, actually, I don't think that the South Koreans themselves, they view the North in a completely different light to most Westerners would. They see them more as their fellow countrymen. They don't really see them as the huge problem that Western people do.
Interesting.
Yeah, they seem to have an apathy with the people from North Korea, as opposed to a hatred or a fear or anything like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Rease, where can people read more about your travels?
We have a blog called Two Nomads, One Narrative.com. So there's things on there about our time in South Korea, and we're currently in Vietnam, so starting to write about that and things as well. So, yeah.
Okay. And as I recall, the 2 and the 1 are numbers, but we'll put a link to that in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. Rease, thanks so much for coming on the Amateur Traveler and telling us some more about South Korea.
All right, thanks for having me.
As you know, when we have guests on the Amateur Traveler, they give their opinions about a particular place, and their opinions are their opinions, and we occasionally have controversy because their opinions don't match up with someone else's. And then sometimes we have an episode where I know that we're going to have controversy because I realize that what they said is fairly controversial, and we don't edit that out necessarily. So we had some feedback about the Travel to St. Louis, Missouri episode 285. We heard from one listener who said, everyone in Missouri outside of St. Louis and everyone in the South are Hicks. Yeah, I know what you mean. There are other cities in Missouri. They also didn't like the pictures in the episode, and I'm sorry if that's the case. When we're doing pictures for the episode, my son does that now as the editor, we try and find the best pictures we can, usually from the guest. In this case, we had none from the guest, except for a couple pictures of her. And then, if not, then we try and find Creative Commons pictures on Flickr, and we don't always find the correct picture, apparently, because the picture from the arch showed the old Busch Stadium, which was replaced in 2008. So we used an older picture of the arch, but I imagine it was a picture that seemed attractive, and that's why Mike used it. And also, Carlos Ukeles is a chain of not that authentic Mexican restaurants. In terms of authentic Mexican restaurants, in my opinion, and this is my opinion and not the guests, I don't really think there are many authentic Mexican restaurants in the U.S., so I don't know at this point whether we're talking about Taco Bell not authentic or American Mexican food not authentic, but that's at least another opinion about that particular Mexican restaurants we were talking about. So I wasn't impressed with the presentation of St. Louis, a city I have visited often. And then we did have another feedback from Teresa. You may recall that our guest also didn't recommend going up in the arch, which I disagreed with. And so we heard from Teresa, who said, I grew up in St. Louis area and still have family there. I have to agree with you, Chris. The trip up the arch is fun just by virtue of the unique way the tram takes you up. The view once you're there is fine, but it's the trip that's the thing. Definitely not for the claustrophobic. I would definitely agree with that. But I enjoyed it and have been up there several times. I remember when they were building the arch, and also when my parents took me as a child, yes, this dates me, They've really improved things. It used to be you had to wait in a long line for hours. Now you get a ticket with a time on it and only head back to the tram when it's time to go up. The rest of the time you can wander the museum under the arch or the grounds outside. For families, there's the Science Center / Planetarium, which is fantastic. It's near the zoo in Forest Park. By the way, St. Louis is one of the best zoos in the country. I used to take my kids there when they were young. A really fun feature for the kids is the Science Museum. It spans the highway, and kids love looking down as the cars pass under them. They also used to have many hands-on exhibits. I'm guessing this is still the case, although my kids are grown up and I haven't been for a while. Then we have the Botanical Gardens and Grant's Farm, which are not in Forest Lawn but fun to visit. There are some riverboat cruises. I can't say I've done one, but they might be worth checking into. That's the problem with growing up in a certain place. You often don't do these things. Just across the river in Cahokia, Illinois, is the Greater St. Louis Air and Space Museum for the airplane buffs out there. It's only open on Friday and Saturday, according to their website. I haven't been there, but offers another great item of interest since I love those kinds of museums. On the food front, I did hear Ted Drew's frozen custard mention. It's a St. Louis institution. I'm sure there's more I'm forgetting. She's right about needing a car or someone to drive you around. However, having lived in the Boston area for now 5 years, I can say for sure it's very easy to drive around St. Louis. They have street signs and they have blocks, so it's not too hard to find things. And now that I work in Boston 1 week out of the month, I certainly understand what you mean. Driving in Boston is a little more challenging. Those roads were not built for cars. It's too bad she had to bring politics into the conversation. I know it's not you, it's the guests who periodically insist on bringing up this off-putting feature. I can't think of the last time I looked at visiting a place and decided yes or no because the people who live there vote a certain way, which makes them hip and fun. Hey, who knew? Teresa, thanks for your opinion as well. And we also heard from Nicki, who agreed also on the arch visit, and then said the old courthouse is also interesting. It's just a couple blocks from the arch, and it's where the historic Dred Scott decision was rendered. And Mickey actually did the 1 hour riverboat cruise, which was informative and provided the best way to get a photo of the whole arch without driving over to Illinois. They also visited Grant's Farm, former home of U.S. Grant. His home site and a small museum are there, but most of the property has been converted to a small zoo. Several of the Budweiser Clydesdales are kept there as well, and they are certainly magnificent. And so there you go, 3 more opinions about St. Louis. With that, we're going to bring this episode to a close. If you have any comments on any episode we've done, including this one, leave a comment on the website at amateurtraveler.com, or you can drop me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. But I do encourage you to share your opinions on the website with other people who might come there to correct anything that we have said, or just correct anything you disagree with. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.